Welcome to the UFC 317 Phantom Punch preview show. Before we actually get started, I want to talk about the months-long project I did with Tim Wheaton from Calf Kick Sports. As most of my subs know, head movement is a misunderstood topic in MMA. So Tim and I decided that it would be a good idea to educate people on how slipping is applied in combat sports that involve kicking. What you're watching right now are animations that I rotoscoped for that special study. If you want to see how this study came together, and you want to hear Tim Wheaton narrate all over these animations, go check out this video now. Yeah, I'm talking right now. You'll appreciate this podcast even more if you watch this first.
Hey, thank you, Ghost. Appreciate it, and appreciate you having me on. This fight is just going to be awesome in any way, shape, or form, I think. I think it's hard for it not to be. And I think what makes this fight really interesting is that we haven't seen Topuria against a guy like Oliveira. And you'll obviously go more into that. However, we haven't seen him have to contend with a lot of the things that Oliveira does. When you're looking at Topuria's career, it's hard to say he's anything but exceptional. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday offline, but he has this very simple game when you're watching it, in that he only really has a couple weapons. He has his overhand right, he has his jab, he has his left hook, and he has a low kick that he times really well. When you're just looking at his striking weapons, that's most of what there is. It's not super varied, but what does make it varied and where the nuance comes in is in all of the little things he does. A lot of that has to do with his footwork, his step-in feints. I think his step-in feints are probably the biggest thing. How he's actually transferring his weight. His weight transfers are very interesting. When he chooses to shift, when he chooses to split step, all of these little footwork things and how he pressures tend to make his game really special. He kind of approaches his fights, and people kind of use this talking point sometimes, and it kind of sounds done to death. However, he does approach fights more like a really good boxer, where his first round, he's quote-unquote getting his reads. He is constantly pressuring forward, but the interesting thing about that is he's not hanging on the back foot to get his reads, kind of like in the Anderson Silva style. He's constantly coming forward. He's constantly stepping and dipping, transferring his weight to the front foot. He's letting you know that he might come in, and this also helps with the striking. That's what a committed strike looks like, and he can just use a simple step in and weight transfer where he's kind of dipping outside his lead leg to make you think that he's striking. He always has that offensive threat with his step in feints, and he's moving forward, and he'll keep his jab in open space. He'll actually occupy with the body jab a lot. He'll catch you with a really well-timed leg kick. He did that to both Max and Volkanovski, where it kind of takes you off of your feet. And so he's constantly having that while kind of seeing what you'll do and how you will handle his pressure. The fight rolls on. As he gets an idea of what you want to do to him, then he'll start to turn it up, and he'll find his cross counter will start working. He'll start to follow up on his cross counter with the left hook. That's where the magic really starts to happen. Things when looking at this matchup that intrigue me are how the clinch will go. I think how he's dealt with collar ties in both of his previous fights are a big thing to consider. Who's actually going to be moving forward, considering Charles Oliveira's recent form, and also how he'll deal with kicks, because if there's any weakness that he's had, aside from like the Bryce Mitchell fight and how Mitchell was actually able to use the double jab really well, which I don't know. Actually, Oliveira in his last fight used it pretty well. But regardless, how he's going to deal with kicks, that's been the main weakness of his career, really, I think, is that he doesn't, almost like similar to Joshua Van, in that we talked about Joshua Van uses low kicks in the same way. He doesn't have much of a defense for kicks besides maybe like an odd parry, just kind of keeping his high guard up. He'll maybe try and like turn out check rather than like a step up check to check kicks, but really he's not defending kicks that much in any significant way.
I think those were definitely good reads. Charles Oliveira, on the other hand, he's a different type of pressure fighter. He's a pressure fighter that's like physically going to break you by moving forward. He does that by pushing the pace really well. Like Kick said earlier, Topuria is a guy that has minimal weapons, but he uses those weapons in specific ways that allow him to create threats. Charles Oliveira, on the other hand, unlike Topuria, actually has great variety in his strikes. I think that starts with his upright stance. And he uses that upright stance. He uses it really well, and he's able to advance forward. His narrow stance allows him to pressure forward, but at the same time, he can also step back into a longer stance to set up his mechanically perfect counter left hook. And then when I say mechanically perfect, that means that his left hook is the left hook that you teach in every textbook, where you transfer your weight from the lead foot, like where the lead foot is pivoting back, and then your rear foot goes flat. So you're putting all your weight from lead foot to rear foot, and then you're throwing your hips, your shoulders into the left hook. And it's usually a counter for him. That's how he knocked out Michael Chandler. Michael Chandler came in with a right straight to the body, pulled back as high as possible, and Charles caught him with that textbook left hook, like in the side view, like perfect.
One of my favorite strikes of all time.
Yeah, for sure. And another weapon he has that he likes to chase people around with, kind of like Josh Van, but he uses it in a smarter context, is kicks from either legs. Against Justin Gaethje, he would throw the rear front snap kick when Justin would show his weaves. Illia Topuria is a guy that when he uses false entries, he puts all of his weight to his lead foot, but he does that out at borders, just out of kicking range. He's threatening to come in. Whereas Justin Gaethje, he will weave in at range. He'll do it a little bit closer, so he's in range to get kicked by Charles Oliveira. And then you'll see this at the very opening moments of that Justin Gaethje fight. Charles Oliveira will come in, walk up to Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje will use a weave. As Justin Gaethje's recovering his stance, Oliveira will just like slot in that rear front snap kick to his hip. That's a good look for Charles Oliveira. And his snap kick to the open side, that one was really evident against Dustin Poirier. Like he would land that shot every time Dustin would reset. That's something to look out for because Poirier resets a lot, especially when when he's not making threats. That would be a good time for Oliveira to use his front kicks.
100%. And this is, I think, the interesting part of the fight when I'm looking at it. If he can get his pressure going with those kicks early and at the very least give something to Poirier that he has to contend with, and really the main way that he's dealt with kicks is by coming in as they kick, trying to time them as they kick and then smother them and hit them with punches, which has worked well for him. It's like an offensive form of defense. It worked well for him against Max. It didn't work as well, I suppose. I think it worked pretty well against Volkanovski. Sorry, I keep going back on what I'm saying. But that's been his main form of it, but it's also in Charles, he stands really tall. He stands really upright. He's been cracked with shots before, but at the same time, Charles has a big, long frame that you're dealing with. Topuria is probably around Michael Chandler's height, if I'm not mistaken. They're probably near the same height.
Yeah, maybe Topuria is a little bit smaller.
Yeah. And when we're looking at Charles's last fight, this is where it's interesting because I think in Charles's last two fights, he's looked very good in both of them, but he does look a little more considered. He's not as balls to the wall coming forward with insane offense like he was. He's still very offensive and very fun to watch, but he is a bit more considered. And in the Chandler fight, what you saw is really he just set up his kicking game and just did not stop throwing front kicks and oblique kicks, even if the front kicks were either to the body or, like you said, to the hip. He just kept that going, and he didn't really get bored with it. He kind of just stuck to it until he saw something from Chandler or until he was kicking into punching range and then following up with extended combinations there. So that's an interesting thing to consider when we're looking at how Topuria loves to be on the front foot, and he has a very heavy front foot because he's always putting his weight on it to dip. That's how he's creating those false entries, is he's getting really heavy on that front foot. And Charles himself has he also has a pretty well timed low kick that he's caught people with, Chandler specifically, who when looking at fights, I do like to look at both similar styles and people with similar statures to see how they dealt with them. And Chandler, at the very least, has a similar stature, not really a similar style. It will be interesting to see who gets the initiative early, considering Charles is a little more considered, but his kicks can stifle a lot of what Topuria wants to do with creating his invisible threats early on in a fight.
It's a really good point that you mentioned about Topuria jamming the kick. But I also have to mention that there's a caveat to that for Topuria, because in the Volkanovski fight and in the Holloway fights, he would jam the kicks really well, but those were mainly round kicks. When Max would start to throw, he'd
Yes.
start to throw teeps. His main response to those were to parry. I think the front kicks with Oliveira, I think that'll definitely play a big factor, because Oliveira is really good at timing those when his opponent's on the lead foot, like not as in like his opponent's moving forward, but when his opponent's weight gets to the lead foot,
Yep.
he's good at timing those, because he does it in a way where the snap kick comes right as the opponent is going to the neutral stance.
Didn't Miguel just post that clip of when Charles did that oblique kick and Chandler's leg just buckled under him?
Yeah, I
Like,
think that's a different context though, because Chandler's like doing that stupid thing where he's coming in with his knee toed in the other way,
yes.
and
Yeah,
Chandler could just
that'll
time
obviously
that.
buckle it like that. But to your point, at the very least, about timing,
Yeah.
he's good at getting that front kick timing. You know, Max used like a floating front kick where he kind of came in with like a floating teep and then would jam the front leg. He hit that on Topuria pretty much without being countered off of it ever, really. That kind of just jammed up Topuria in his stance a lot of times.
I don't think Topuria can have an answer for that, because just of the way he uses his stance, right?
It's because his whole game is predicated around the false entries and the feints he creates off of shifting weight onto his lead foot.
Mm-hmm. Another thing to consider in that Max fight is he was actually on the rear foot most of that fight.
Mm-hmm.
Like where his weight was when he was pressuring forward, monitoring Max's jab, which I don't think he needs to do here, because Oliveira, he's not a guy that feints with his jab a lot or is active with his lead hand.
Throw a double jab out sometimes, like in the Chandler fight, and he'll start like a combination. He's not using it like Max, where Max was kind of using it to force Topuria to move his head and then throw a round kick off that, which worked well in moments. That's a really good read against Topuria, is get him moving his head with the jab and then kick him off of it. I don't see that particular instance playing itself out in the same way. And that's a great point about the Max fight, is he was playing the fight from the back foot, and then it was the transfer onto the lead foot that kind of brought his offense into context, really.
So you mentioned getting Topuria to move his head. This is a good way for Oliveira to capitalize on that habit, because everybody knows Topuria wants to show that he can slip.
Yes.
There was one instance in the Max Holloway fight where Max throws a double jab, but on the second jab, he grabs the collar tie. That's a really good plan for Oliveira against Topuria in this spot, because
I was thinking of the same exact thing with the collar tie.
Oliveira has a really potent clinch game where he'll get hip separation and then he'll land beautiful clinch knees and break with elbows.
Yeah, and even break off the clinch, the Gaethje finish, and this is more due to how Gaethje exits clinches himself. He's always throwing that beautiful right straight off of the clinch break. He shows enough offense within there to make them uncomfortable, where they're just like, I have to get out of here by any means necessary.
And that actually brings me to a really interesting idea. I've noticed this when watching Topuria. He actually doesn't seek initiative in the clinch. He'll actually break his own posture. So how often is Charles going to initiate the clinch, and whether Topuria wants to play that game?
You're totally right, because we haven't really seen him operate in the clinch, like you said, besides disengaging. We don't know how he'll actually deal with a potent offensive threat there. And this is the front kicking and the clinch. There's a lot to like about what Oliveira just does generally against someone who has the style and stature of Topuria, which is the interesting part. Then the only thing that comes into question is Charles he's not chinny, but he's not, you know what I mean when I'm saying this. He'll get rattled by a punch. Even up a weight class is probably still going to be a very good puncher. Maybe it's diminished a bit. Who knows? He's still going to be a very respectable puncher. And when you saw in the Gaethje fight, Gaethje, and who knows if he'll actually do this, Gaethje would punch himself out of the clinch, and that worked to drop Oliveira once for real, and the second time was kind of sort of Oliveira, I think, doing, just kind of dropping on his own terms. He's looking for the offense there, and he has gotten hit by the opponent trying to break the clinch himself. And I don't know if you want to get into this just yet. This is more of a defensive reaction rather than Oliveira who actually seeks the clinch. Both the Volkanovski and the Max Holloway finish, each of them were trying to get the collar tie to pull Topuria in as he actually, or right before he landed the finishing punch.
Good point that you mentioned. And you also mentioned the way Charles gets cracked and gets dropped. This is just a theory, obviously, but I think that's more because of his upright stance.
Yes,
He's
totally right.
like, he's not in a stance that allows him most of the time to take those punches, or absorb those punches. So we don't actually know how chinny Charles Oliveira is. It's just that he's getting cracked in a
compromised,
in a compromised position.
I don't think he's chinny, because I don't want to use that word, because he obviously survived all those punches. Even the Makhachev, he didn't have any feet on the ground when he got he was completely in the air. He just puts himself in these disadvantageous positions, which, and against Topuria, that's the other thing. He's just such a good finisher. That's the thing that I noticed, is that both Max and Volk were trying to get the collar tie, which Topuria either pivoted or weaved out from to land. It might have been the left hook in both cases, but definitely with Oliveira, he kind of pivoted off and landed the left hook after Max tried to circle off with the collar tie, which is interesting because in open space, I can definitely see him getting eaten up with collar tie. And that was obviously more collar tie out of defensive desperation. I don't think it will necessarily present itself if Oliveira is doing what he does, but it's definitely something to consider. And they were both backed up to the cage in each of those instances, which is another consideration.
Topuria did capitalize on both Max and Volk trying to get reactive clinches. Topuria is really good at exploiting people trying to get the collar tie, but when he does have the collar tie, like there was one instance in the Volkanovski fight where Volk shot in for a double leg. Topuria like lifted him up with a whizzer, and then Volk used a single collar tie and bicep tie, landed knee and an elbow.
Yeah, it was actually really nice. I remember that.
Topuria does get like caught in a clinch with a collar tie and a bicep tie. He's trying to get out of there as quickly as possible, but when he sees the person trying to go for the tie or reach for the collar tie, that's when he's able to crack.
Yes, definitely. And that's why I did want to mention that, because it's something to consider, but also it's definitely going to be used within a different context in Oliveira's case. Considering he is, like you said, and you made this read, considering he's dipping and slipping all the time to come into range, that gives Oliveira the opportunity, as such a big, tall dude, to just slap it on and try and control his posture from there and stop any of his, he'll throw like a good shifting combination and he'll dip within them. He has opportunities within there to at least enter the clinch and start working his game.
Like we've been saying throughout this whole podcast, Topuria really likes to slip and show people that he can slip. But the thing with Oliveira that's different from like Topuria's style of pressuring is he doesn't really use a lot of feint. It's more he moves forward, and the counters that he gets is from the opponent's response to his forward pressure.
Oliveira's pressure is very honest, and Topuria's pressure, at least early on, is much more like invisible.
Topuria's is more like, oh, I have this threat of an overhand. Like I can knock you out with this at any time.
Yeah, because he's just so. I mean, it's awesome because they're probably two of the most offensively potent fighters in the sport. So it's going to be really interesting to see who can kind of hold out, especially when, kind of like we've been talking about, Oliveira certainly makes himself vulnerable in moments. I wonder, he hasn't really been in his last two fights, even with the Michael Chandler one in the 5th round. I think when you actually look at it, it's more him backing up because he got poked in the eye. Yeah, funnily enough, from Chandler. And then him getting cracked in the head in the back of the head a billion times afterwards. In his last two fights, since he's had a more considered approach, he hasn't put himself in those positions as much. He's been a bit more deliberate with when he enters with a combination. I don't know if you necessarily want to let Topuria on the front foot and begin his game. But then you have to consider that maybe Oliveira's just kicking game from range has the ability to stifle that to a large extent. So how the front foot's going to play out, given Oliveira's recent form, and I'm not saying it's bad, it's just different. And also just Topuria's natural game and how Oliveira is kind of a good counter for it in a lot of ways it's very interesting. And I'm wondering how the front foot action is actually going to play out when they both get in there.
The front foot action, for those watching, it's not the front foot like we always talk about where you get your weight to the front foot. We're talking about who's moving forward. I think what's important in this case is Oliveira's defensive reactions, because if you rewatch the Islam fight, his defensive reactions there weren't great. Islam would show a jab, put his hand on top of Oliveira's lead hand, he'd back up with a high guard, and that is a nightmare against Illia Topuria.
Yeah, Charles's defensive reactions have never been the greatest, at the very least in terms of how he could get pressured. He's kind of okay within an exchange when he's not putting himself in a compromised position. He actually does have like some somewhat subtle head movement when he's in that, but that's usually when he's entering on his own terms and he's dealing with whatever comes after.
Goes back to his stance when he's coming in on his own terms. He has to extend his stance more so he can slip to the front foot. He's more often than not tall most of the times, especially in exchanges.
That helps him with his collar tie game and trying to put weight on them and work front choke game and then the knees off of that. But yeah, it definitely puts him not in the best defensive spot to be able to absorb strikes.
An interesting aspect of this game is who's going to try to initiate takedowns.
Yeah, that's the other part that I don't really know, because his whole career was generally grappling based. He definitely has the acumen for it, but what's that actually going to look like against Oliveira?
Right. So, like, I was thinking about this. Like, Islam, he dropped Oliveira off of a flying knee, and then went into the grappling. The first round of that fight, Oliveira was the one that initiated the grapple. Then Islam scored that cool wizard throw
off the knee exchange. I feel like everybody forgets that first round of Islam Oliveira, it was very competitive in all of those grappling exchanges. It was just like fun and good and competitive.
You saw Oliveira's bottom game from half guard. He's able to get the underhook under the ass. Yeah. Another Dan Tom reference.
Yeah.
And he was able to scramble up and try to get the back body lock on Islam,
who is one of the most oppressive top guys in the sport right now.
Because he took Max down at the end of the first round. Does he want to take Oliveira down in this fight? We don't know.
Maybe he does want to do that Oliveira game plan of smush his head in the fence and punch. That's an option. But at the same time, I don't know. It's tough to see him wanting to do that because, you know, you always hear about dangerous guard, dangerous this. Like, yeah, if there's anyone who you really, it's tough to contend with them, even if you're a really great top player. He's like the one where that actually applies, where it's just, I don't know, because I don't know if he's actually going to want to pursue that. Maybe he will, and maybe he won't. He will want to go for that if he can get Oliveira up against the fence. I don't necessarily see it like that. I don't know. What do you think?
Does he want to get Oliveira up against the fence? Because when he took Max down, he had a pretty good fence takedown there, where he had the locked hands double, and then when he tried to control Max, he did the standard stuff, which was to get the outside hook in. He doesn't really control the fence side space well, so his opponent along the fence does get up. But with Oliveira, it's different because Oliveira likes to play guard. Yeah. And you don't really see wall walking from Oliveira.
No, yeah, he's always trying to enter in on the legs and get up off that, create those scrambles, create the opportunities to get up with his submission attempts. A lot of it is to get up, and maybe he will get something, but a lot of it is at the service of actually getting up, not through wall walking, but through introducing a threat.
On the Oliveira side, do you initiate takedowns when Topuria does come in? Because Topuria does overextend a lot.
Yeah, and honestly, now that you just said it, that was one of the most interesting parts of his performance against Michael Chandler, is he was much more insistent on pursuing the wrestling. He really just big brothered him through a lot of that performance, through the takedowns and through his top control. The first round, they were in this weird ass position where he couldn't really get his leg out and he just kind of stayed like sitting on him. It was very strange. But other than that, honestly, it might actually be a good avenue for Oliveira in terms of wearing him down, keeping him, giving him a place to stay safer, given his defensive reactions on the feet. At the very least, introducing to give Topuria something to think about, and considering he is much more willing to wrestle now, at the very least from that Chandler performance, where that was really the crux of most of what he was doing, I think that could actually be a really good idea against Topuria.
Really test Topuria. How does he respond with his back to the cage? Because again, that's something that we don't really see, right?
Mitchell did get him down a couple times, didn't he?
Yeah, he did, but that was an open space.
Exactly, yeah, that was an open space, and Oliveira's wrestling along the cage has looked, in the Michael Chandler fight, the rematch, of course, is what I'm referring to when I've been speaking about that, looked really exceptional. It looked really nice. It looked really varied, and he was kind of doing whatever he wanted against a dude who has a similar stature to Topuria, who is a physical specimen who is no grappling slouch, no matter what his tactics generally are. He's no slouch himself. He has a really good grappling coach. So it's hard to see how Oliveira maybe wouldn't want to do that, because it could be a really good idea against Topuria, who the only person who has tried it, and Bryce Mitchell, had a lot of success against him within that fight.
Taking him down is actually a good way to test to see whether Topuria is willing to wall walk, because in the Bryce Mitchell fight, we didn't really see him wall walk. We saw him play guard a little bit. If Oliveira does take him down and is able to stay on top for a little bit, that's time where he's not getting cracked in a stance where he's vulnerable.
That's what I really liked about that Chandler performance, is he's using that as a space for him to kind of stay safe, is actually, instead of, because even when he's on bottom and he's introducing those threats and he's so dynamic and good from there, just like he's so dynamic and good on the feet, I feel like he never was really exploiting a place for him where he could take a breather and stay safe. And that's exactly what working on his wrestling and being more committed to staying on top has kind of provided him.
His best entry for that, not when he throws his jab, but when he commits hard on his overhand, because what Oliveira is really good at is getting the body lock and then shucking to the back.
He had like good entries against Chandler, who's so much shorter than him, from Chandler like overextending. So he definitely can do it. He was shooting like a normal takedown. Like, it's there. He can do that even against a shorter guy like Topuria.
The last 15 minutes of this podcast, I think we should kind of discuss more hypothetical game plans. On my end, I'll discuss like what Oliveira should do, and then you can do what Topuria should do against Oliveira.
Like we talked about, a lot of what Oliveira does seems like it will trouble him. But he's going to want to get on the front foot early with his feinting and introducing the double jab to at least give Oliveira something to think about and to keep him moving backwards. Because like you said, in that Makhachev fight, when he was occupying the lead hand, and a lot of times before an exchange starts, when the opponent is trying to get the initiative with starting an exchange with non-committal weapons like the jab, Oliveira will kind of just jump out of range and back off and reset. And in that time that he's resetting, he's not on the front foot being an absolute bulldozer with his own offense, a lot of which troubles Topuria. Getting on that front foot initiative early, not necessarily not in terms of the heavy front foot, but in terms of moving forward with jab feints and step-in feints, while being considerate of Oliveira's front kicking game, is going to be really important to at least keep Oliveira on the back foot and keep him defensive and resetting rather than committing to his offense. I think if he can do that, and if he can bring Oliveira to the cage through that, he'll have a much better time at actually trying to do what he does best, and that's form combinations and go up and down to the head and body along the cage. I think if he can't get on the initiative like that early on and keep Oliveira resetting, without that crux, it's going to be really hard for him to enact his game, other than looking for those points when Oliveira is trying to get the collar tie, or if he notices something defensive from Oliveira in terms of the collar tie, to try and hit him when he is vulnerable. And that's probably the main other part that he'll want to look at, is since he's so straight up in his stance, kind of in a similar way to what we were talking about with Van and Royval, trying to time those cross-counter opportunities. Even though Charles isn't using the jab that much, all of his strikes are committed and he's coming forward with them and he's straight up in his stance. So trying to time your cross counter as one of your longer weapons against such a tall dude for the division, crack him while he is so upright and try and get one of those bad Oliveira reactions out of him.
Oliveira's side, I think the strategy is really simple. Push Topuria towards the cage and then find a way to take his back. Like, you don't need to finish him. Just find a way to get the back position. Easier said than done, because tactically, Oliveira is going to need to be a lot more clever to do that. What he should do at range, which is front kicks for Oliveira. It's going to be there because Topuria, when he does do his false entry, he will bounce back. And when he does bounce back and he bounces back in, you can stab him with a front kick. When you do stab him with a front kick, see what his reaction is. Like, is he backing up? Is he trying to parry them? Like we said earlier, Topuria wants to show that he can slip punches. Use that opportunity to grab collar tie. Use your jab to make him slip punches and grab collar ties off of that, and then hammer him with knees, because you know that he's going to break his own posture. And when he does break his own posture, you can knee the shit out of him. He tries to escape the clinch, break with elbows. You might crack him like you did Justin Gaethje. Oliveira does not want is extended exchanges, especially with his back to the cage.
Mm-hmm.
But if he does find himself in extended exchanges, I would suggest throw the high kick or throw the knee at the end of it, kind of like what Jai Herbert did on Topuria.
Yeah.
Like, just, it doesn't need to knock him out. Test out what Topuria is doing in those extended exchanges. Is he dropping his rear hand? Is he dipping too low? The step up high kick and the step up knee, that's a good way to test whether Topuria is like being responsible. Lastly, I think, yeah, just duck under Topuria's back when Topuria does overextend.
Yeah, because he will. He will
Yeah.
on the shifting combinations. The other thing that I did forget, Topuria should probably just try and jab the body a lot along with doing the double jab.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Because Oliveira's so upright. He's so tall. The body's right there. Even when he's kicking, just try and enter with a body jab. Just keep peppering him with that and keep that as a primary form of offense and mixing it up with the double jab. And I think that's how he can really keep that initiative.
The jab to the body specifically, because in Oliveira's last 5 fights, we haven't really seen anybody jab the body. But we saw Chandler try to do his stupid right hand to the body, which was funny.
Yeah. You will see Chandler do that. But no, that's a great point. You haven't really seen anybody do it against Oliveira. And it could be a way to just give you something from range that's going to be hard to contend with against Oliveira's front kicks.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what his defensive reaction is from that body jab, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mix it up with your double jab to the head, use the body jab. You just have that varied jab early on.
Because if he does back up like what he did with Islam and then put on his high guard, that is right for Topuria to just rip the body along the fence.
Yeah, he loves that.
The way he backed up in that fight specifically, he squared up and then he like earmuffs. So like I think that's perfect for the body jab.
Yeah. Straight punches to the body are definitely something you could utilize against Oliveira rather than just Michael Chandler's right straight to the body in isolation.
And I think there is a caveat to that in that the body jab does leave Topuria open for the counter left hook if he does stand back up along the tracks.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's also something to consider. But when Topuria did body jab Volkanovski would try to left hook counter him. But the way Topuria exited was really smart. He would exit to the side of the body jab and then he'd dip his head. He wasn't really there to get counter left hooked.
Yeah. That's where he's so special, is those like little nuanced things he does to keep him safe in areas that you think he should be vulnerable and keep his offense going despite, all these apparent quote unquote weaknesses. There's openings there, but even when you're exploiting them like Max did really well, you have to do that very consistently for a long amount of time.
I think this is a perfect time to close out the podcast. Dude, we're scared for Charles Oliveira.
Yeah, just from the stance of Illia is so powerful and you might get cracked. On paper, it looks, there's a lot of things to like about Charles Oliveira in the fight when you're looking at it from how their actual natural games and styles match up. But Topuria is still a very well-schooled fighter, very well considered, and maybe he's not as powerful at lightweight, but he's still going to be very much a respect.
Before we get into the weeds, let's start off with our Substack plugs. So, Kick, go right ahead.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Kick from the Movement Marshals, the resident fight analyst there. You can find all our best content at movementmarshals.com. It's mostly the Substack, but we've also got links to some upcoming products, Thick, my partner's programs, and just some general fight analysis for you to enjoy. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you guys want extra analytical content and updates on what I'm working on, you can sign up for free on my Substack. And the link is in the bio and under my avatar here. But you can pledge $5 a month or $55 a year, and you'll get access to all my premium content, which has the execution series, some short breakdowns of exchanges I think is cool, and post-fight studies.
Thank you. Thank you, Ghost. Yeah, Pantoja, it's kind of beaten to death, at least in our circles, but he's just really underappreciated. He's such a fun fighter every time he goes out. And when you're looking at his last matchup against Asakura, he really did look very, very good. And when you're assessing Pantoja's game, it's kind of simple in seeing the things he does well and also some of his deficiencies. Kind of like we talked about in our Bilal JDM podcast, and we've talked about this offline as well, is that Pantoja is sort of in the mold of these champions who are exceptional in at least one phase of grappling. He's probably the best out of all of that crop of champions, like DDP, like Marab, but do have some deficiencies on the feet and kind of make up for it by just being either a physical hoss, really durable, all these other sorts of things. So when you're assessing him, it's kind of simple in a way because he has some of the best back taking in the sport, some of the best back retention in the sport, and he's just incredible there, very potent there. He's also not bad on top, especially top half guard, which we saw in the Brendan Royval fight. And in terms of striking, he has a lot of good tactical reads, like a lot of these other champions that I was referencing, where especially in both the Urseg and the Asakura fights, he'll often get them moving backwards because he does just tend to blitz forward with these running kind of silly looking combinations that don't get punished all that often, or they do get punished, but he kind of just no-sells it because he's just kind of made of metal. And he just doesn't seem to actually absorbs the damage is rather what I'd say. And this will often bring them to the fence where he can just enter on the hips, get to the back, start his crab riding series. But also, when he gets them moving backwards, he has a lovely body kick that he catches them as they retreat back on a straight line, which I think will be notable against Kai Kara France. And if anything is really slick on the feet, it's definitely his transitional game and some of his work in the clinch, whether that's with trips, whether that's with knees. His transitional offense and his opportunistic offense within those transitional moments is really, really good. And he's always very crafty from there, always trying new things. I think I got most of his game down in a broad sense.
Now I'll talk about Kai Kara France. So I actually briefly talked about France's offense in Fight Mind with our boy JDK. Make sure you follow him. So Kai's offense is dedicated to punishing level changes and preventing level changes. And he mainly relies on his rear uppercut and his body jab. And the way he uses his body jab is he'll split the jab. For those listening, that means that when the opponent jabs at you, you slip outside of their jab and then simultaneously jab back. Kai Kara France is using a body jab. He'll slip the opponent's jab and then body jab and body jab. When his opponents start to jab back at him consistently, then he'll come over the top with a cross counter. So he uses the body jab to get reads, and the reads he's often looking for is the rear hand parry, so he can follow up with the jab upstairs. Or like I said earlier, he's trying to get his opponents to jab back at him so he can come over the top with a cross counter. And this is a common look for the CKB boys, but he also likes to throw the jab at his opponent's rear hand to get reads. Ambient movement wise, like during the dead space of a fight. So if you guys don't know what that means, reference Phantom Punch Podcast episode 1. Kick talks about the dead space of a fight a lot with JDM. In regards to that, Kai Kara France, he's an east-west fighter that concedes a lot of space. Slowly concedes space since he's always looking for the cross counter. But when his opponents stop reacting, this is like one of the more annoying habits, but it's also effective for him. He'll shift in with his punches, like similar to Volkanovski. I think James Krause summed up his game really well in the second Moreno fight in the corner. He had a really good read on like what Kai wants to do, and he said it perfectly. He just wants to counter with the overhand and kick his legs. This is something to consider grappling-wise. When he fought Amir Albazi and Askar Askarov, he gave up his back a lot, which, again, that's something that Kick mentioned earlier. That's something to consider against Pantoja because that is what Pantoja is looking for, and he's probably the best at it in the flyweight division. And his defense when on his back is pretty standard. When you watch the Askarov fight back, Kai's just trying to get a 2-on-1, and then he's pulling that over his head for a baseball bat grip just to turn over and get top position. And most of the time he didn't get it. And his defense along the fence against Amir Albazi looked pretty good. He turned in on Albazi and attained head height, and then when Albazi goes for the near side hook off the fence, he'll turn in and then he'll scramble to top position, that was good to see. So that'll be interesting against Pantoja. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kick with his hypothetical game plan for Pantoja against Kai Kara-France.
Great reads on Kai's game. Like you said, when they do stop reacting, he'll have these big shifting punches, and those I think tend to be his most significant. Those tend to be his most significant lands, at least early on in the fight, especially in the Usyk fight, the Moreno fight. He can catch them with those shifting combinations. When looking at him versus Pantoja, it is good to consider, like you said, he has very, very competent and standard back defense. He was always looking to, like you said, get head height. He was always fighting the top hand of the choke. And he was also always focusing on committing one hand to breaking the body triangle, standing up and breaking the body triangle, which was good. Those are all good things to do. But at the end of the day, it is still just defense. So he can probably survive against Pantoja. But like you said, the thing that I noticed is in the dead spaces, he's tending to move side to side. He's using a lot of that lateral movement in the dead spaces. But when an opponent comes in on him with some sort of blitz, you saw this with Moreno, you see this against a lot of his opponents, he will back up in that straight line. And that's kind of the normal reaction for most people when your opponent comes in on a blitz. And this plays pretty nicely with Pantoja's game, who he has these nice technical moments, whether he's following you with the body kick, whether he's actually checking kicks in space and then punching you off of them, whether he has a pretty good leg kick of his own. He has a lot of these nice little weapons that he finds openings for throughout a fight. In those dead spaces, he will get cracked himself many times. He just kind of seems to no-sell it. And of course, that's the question with Pantoja is kind of when is this train gonna stop? When is he finally gonna get cracked? Because he will get cracked. That's almost an assured possibility, especially against KKF, who commits a lot of his weight to his punches, especially when he's shifting. And that's why he drops people. That's why he's one of the flyweights that drops people, because he's committing a lot of his weight to those punches. If Pantoja isn't, if his chin's not done, if he's good, it's hard for me to see how KKF deals with his somewhat silly looking shifting combination, not even shifting, just running forward with his straights, because that's how he usually gets people to the fence. And Kai will concede that space to move back to the fence. And as we saw in the Asakura fight, and Asakura looked gigantic against him. He was able to grab a single off of a flying knee, which I don't see KKF do all that often, but it's always there against Pantoja. But he'll get on the hips and he'll find his way to the back and he'll start that crab ride series. And it's hard for me to see a consistent way for KKF to build his game. I can see him, cracking with cross counter. He might be able to pepper his legs from range, but Pantoja's okay at defending leg kicks. So I think he can come in with what he usually does, given that he can actually absorb the damage, just kind of run him ragged by probably like the third round, because that's kind of what he does. It's what you saw in the Usyk fight. Even though Usyk was competitive through all that, Pantoja just, if he's moving forward and kind of coming out like a bat out of hell, Kai's defensive reactions play into his game pretty well.
That's a really good read that Pantoja just doing his regular game matches really well with Kai. I think you're completely right there. I think Kai is the one that's going to have to make a lot of bigger adjustments than Pantoja is. For Kai in this, I would say don't shift as much and don't concede as much space like he normally does. Because like I said earlier, and like you just mentioned, Kai, he will slowly concede space because he's moving side to side a lot. And not only does he use the side to side movement to set up his cross counter, he's also trying to find an angle for his low kicks. I don't think that's something you really want to do low kicks against Pantoja, because you're pretty much giving him like a leg catch opportunity. A lot of times, Kai Kara-France, he'll put himself to the cage without a lot of pressure on him.
Yes. Exactly.
because he's trying to get so many reads. The way he relieves pressure when his back is along the fence is to shift into punches, and that's really bad against Pantoja because Pantoja can get a body lock from there, maybe even shuck and get to his back, which you don't want to give Pantoja those opportunities. So I would say stay committed with the body jab and right hand to the body if it presents himself, like he did in the Usyk fight. And then I'd say find your cross counter late. Pantoja, like we said earlier, he has one thing in his striking, and that's just double right hands. The way to exploit that, I think France can probably debase him a lot of the time, but he's going to have to be careful with this. Suggest to counter that is to kick the inside of the leg as he steps in into the opposite stance. When Pantoja shifts in, he'll be in his new southpaw stance. Kai would have to use his rear leg inside low kick, which is a long weapon, but because Pantoja is shifting in, he'll be fully committed. There's a chance to debase him there. That's really on Kai's timing, and it'll be interesting to see if they drilled that specific count to Pantoja's blitzes. Out, I have a feeling this can be extremely messy on the feet since both these guys like to shift in with their right hands. What do you think?
100%. The thing with that inside low kick is you saw Kaya Sakura use it a couple times, but the other thing is that he was throwing a committed step up inside low kick. Kai is kind of just using it like a lot of the city kickboxing guys do as just like kind of like a peppery attack, which leaves him a lot more vulnerable in that situation. You can definitely debase him on his blitzes with that low kick, but if it's not committed enough, then you're just leaving yourself on one foot for Pantoja to kind of crash in into the clinch, get you up against the fence, and start his whole crab shuck to the back crab ride series.
Probably the last question of the podcast. Do you think that Kai has to make all these necessary adjustments while Pantoja just can be himself?
It's worked for Pantoja thus far, where he likes to find certain things. He's doing that double right hands, walking combinations. But in those more dead spaces of the fight, he does find some cool things that work for him. He does seem to at least get an idea of what to do throughout the fight. What he usually does, I think, just plays into Kai's defensive reactions well. And Kai really probably will crack him with some big, really committed shifting punches because he swings on those. But at the same time, like you said, you saw Moreno. I think Moreno and Askarov, I think, both took his back from things like that. At their very least, if they didn't take his back, they entered the body lock. You're just giving him an opportunity to do that, especially when you're shifting off of the cage when you're already being pressured.
A shot that we don't really see from Kai Kara-France is the uppercut to the body. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be helpful here because like you said earlier, like Pantoja just likes to crash in. One of the ways to prevent that is to use the uppercut to the body, and that'll give him the underhook for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I mean, that would be a great weapon. You see other great anti-grappling performances use that, and he is coming from a good team. I just don't know. It's hard to see that sort of thing because, of course, anybody can change. Easy to be surprised in MMA, and it's wonderful when you are. But his defensive reactions, I think, just do play into what Pantoja likes to do very well.
Let's take a quick break. If you haven't done so yet, these are the rest of my socials. You can find all my animations on Instagram and TikTok. On the Elon Musk SpaceX app, you can follow me there where I like to say obnoxious things about the incredibly stupid sport of MMA. Also, make sure you join the Substack. You can actually join for free and get extra content. You'll get updates on what I'm working on and you'll receive it straight to your inbox. I have better content there and all the stuff I've been working on is organized in tabs. Make sure you check that out. Also, Kick for Movement Marshals, my co-host, and MMA Underrated have some of their work featured there too. So make sure to check that out and subscribe to their stuff. With Josh Van. So Josh Van at range, I've noticed he has two distinct weapons, the jab and the lead leg teep. For the jab, he likes to use his jab as a point scorer, so he won't really change rhythm with it, but he will, interestingly, change levels with it. So he'll use it to score body jabs. And it's mainly used to initiate exchanges or force the opponent backwards. And then the second weapon I noticed was his lead leg teep. And he likes to use this weapon when the opponent is standing in front of him or when the opponent circles out towards Van's lead side. I think what's unfortunate for Van with these two weapons is that he doesn't really build or play off these weapons like they should be, like in Muay Thai. While these two weapons are able to get him the cage position he wants by pushing the opponent back, his biggest problem is that he doesn't establish them as threats. He would have such an easier time moving his opponents back if he would show these weapons as fakes, or even a simple adjustment like staggering his jab. So like faking the jab halfway and then coming in like what GSP used to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good read on it. He generally, like you said, he's quite honest from range. And when he's initiating the exchanges, that, like you said, lead leg teep and the jab is varied and he's constantly changing levels with it. He'll sometimes get to that body jab. He has a nice double jab. And especially in his past couple performances, the teep really became a good complement to just his overall pressuring and forward movement. And that's really where they're helping as kind of setting the initiative, but they're also just not building anything significant until an exchange actually starts. And in some of his earlier fights, he was generally starting those exchanges, where in his last two, he's generally using them as tools to keep them at a certain range, wait for them to do something, and then counter what they're doing, since they tend to get more desperate the more he's pressuring them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you brought up. Like these two weapons are more of a thing for him to get exchanges happening, right?
But yeah, get the exchanges started.
Since we're talking about exchanges, the thing that Van like really excels at is his body hitting and inside slip. So the thing I absolutely love about Van's inside slip is that he'll use the right hand under the jab. And he showed this in the Charles Johnson fight. Whenever Johnson would lazily put out his hand to paw out, Van would throw the right hand under his jab. And he'd do this like when they were in close stance, because Charles Johnson would often switch stances in that matchup. And you'd see like whenever he would try to like jab out in a close stance matchup, Van would inside slip, throw the right hand under his armpit. And I really like that look. I really like how he has different options off the inside slip. It's not just the right hand under the jab. Against Edgar Chairez, he'd slip the jab and then go for a left hook to the body. Against Durden, he would go to the jab to get Durden reaching, and then he would hook to the body off the jab. And of course, he has the classic cross counter. So the right hand over the opponent's jab. The thing about these is they're all closed stance matchup looks, which this matchup that he's going into 3 weeks notice is not a closed stance matchup. He's against the southpaw. I noticed his biggest problem with the inside slip is that he needs a specific context to execute it. He has to start with his weight on the back foot, and he needs to see his opponent jab at him when he's in that specific position in order to execute the inside slip and counter. But where he does his best work, I think, is really along the fence. And that's when he has his opponents covering up. And this was really evident in the Kevin Borjas fight and some parts of the Charles Johnson fight. But Van is really good at attacking the space on one side and then pushing the opponent towards the rear side where he can throw his high kicks.
No, those are all great reads. Generally, yeah, in terms of attacking on the fence, like you said, it's one of his best qualities. I think that and just operating within an exchange are probably where he's the most compact and the most skilled, and tends to outclass pretty much everybody he's fighting. And thankfully, along the fence, he crowds that space really well and he kind of creates a pretty close exchange, and then he'll usually hop out back into range. Sometimes he'll even end it with the jab, which is great. He kind of reestablishes that distance, because even for flyweight, he's pretty small. He's still a pretty small, compact dude for flyweight. But yeah, he's wonderful at, you saw in like round 2 of the Johnson fight, Johnson would always shell up. That's exactly what he wants you to do. So when you shell up, that's when he'll start attacking with some uppercuts, and he'll just start ripping your body apart. and he'll get you moving, and he'll throw either that high kick or an open space. He'll even sometimes throw that hard leg kick. He utilizes leg kicks almost in a way like that Illia Topuria does, at least the outside leg kick, where he'll kind of wait for this moment where you're stepping or you're crossing your feet, and then he'll just rip in this huge leg kick that has a lot of impact. He's not always peppering with it. Otherwise, he'll do that step up inside leg kick, which won't really be evident in the southpaw matchup.
That's a really good point about the way he throws his low kick. It really is kind of like Illia Topuria. Like, he needs that specific context that you mentioned.
I like that. You know, we had this kind of renaissance of leg kickers like Pedro Munoz, people who just use the leg kick all the time. But it's almost nice to see it used so tactfully. And when they kick, it just has a huge impact where either you could tell it really hurts or it's taken them pretty much almost off their feet. You saw that twice in the Johnson fight. I think you saw it in his last fight as well. He applies it in a really nice way. In moments, he does look to be a really slick operator, but it's also context and geography, cage geography dependent.
It's more of an opportunistic thing for him. When he sees the read, that's when he'll do it. Let's move on to his transitional hitting and clinch work. In the Durden fight and the Reyes Ruya fight, I thought he did a great job hitting after stuffing the initial shot.
The best parts of that Surya fight.
Yeah, exactly. And both Durden and Ray, they shoot in and then get pulled up into the clinch. But Van did a really good job of attacking their stand-ups, which you've written a lot about.
I've talked that to death, at least in a year. I spent a year talking about that almost exclusively.
What I've noticed is, like, for his defense at least, is he relies a lot on whizzer and wrist control when he's pushed along the fence. I don't know if that's going to be a factor here. And he doesn't really use collar ties that effectively. And the way he deals with collar ties isn't optimal either.
Punches out of him from what I've noticed, but maybe you've seen another thing.
I think you're spot on there. Like, I noticed when Durden would grab collar ties, he would immediately break his own posture and disengage right away. Do you think he could do some serious damage if he forced the clinch more and broke with body shots?
I think he could. I think part of the consideration, at the very least, especially against when you're looking at and I know we're not into this yet, but when you're looking at a tall opponent against Royval, you might just be worried about that knee coming up, because when the height disparity is that much, that's a big thing to consider when you're actually in there in the cage. You're going to be thinking about that sort of thing. But if you can at least disengage on your own terms and break with body shots, that could be a great transitional moment for him, because generally, like in the Durden and Surya fights, he was only getting control of the clinch on the opponent's initiative. They were generally shooting, he would defend, and then because he defended the shot well, he would kind of find himself in an opportunistic spot where, like you said, he had good wrist control, he had a pretty good overhook, he would find himself in a good position, he'd even get good head position a lot of times to either throw an elbow, throw a great knee, and then just kind of disengage. Whereas he could pursue that on his own more. In looking at the Royval fight, maybe we can get into that later.
I was actually in a live chat with Drake Riggs yesterday, and one of my boys from the Discord, shout out to Rio Sozen Truesdale, he mentioned something interesting. He mentioned this about Whaley specifically. He said that the people that will struggle against her are the ones that are looking to take her down. Now, do you think that's true of Van? Because Van does a great job of stuffing initial shots.
Yeah.
And then when he does get people in the clinch, he breaks with strikes really effectively.
Mm-hmm.
That's something you'd agree with?
I would agree with that. Yeah. And like you said, he doesn't really have a collar tie, but the thing he does do really well, and he did it probably a billion times against Surya, and I'm looking at some footage right now, he would get the overhook and then he would frame off the head to create that space rather than pull them in. So he was all about creating the space for strikes within the clinch, at least between their heads. And even though he's kind of a menace to the body off the cage, he'd thrown the occasional knee to the body, but it really seemed like he wanted to push off the head, create that space for a nice little folding elbow or push off and punch. That's where I think he's really, really good.
If he pushed that on his opponents, he could really do some serious stuff.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, if he actually initiated that and made that a part of his game, just because so many fighters are like Van in a way in that they're reactive with the clinch. It's something that you kind of fall into rather than you initiate. Leon Edwards is the primary example of a born and bred clinch fighter who actually looks for the clinch and wants to stay standing in the clinch and attack from there. And Matt Brown's another good one. You don't see many, and Charles Oliveira, I'm just rattling him off now. You don't see many fighters actually use the clinch as the cornerstone of their game, or at least somewhere where they can do a lot of damage. And just by the virtue of that, you're probably going to have a lot of success against people when you can stuff their shots and develop this wonderful defensive wrestling game that Van has to actually do a lot of damage from there if you pursue it.
I think that flows perfectly into this because the clinch is a defensive tool. But for this specific matchup, the clinch might not be a tool that he's going to use because Royval doesn't actively hunt for the clinch. So I think we should move on to Van's defensive habits. So at Borders, so if you guys don't know what Borders is, it's if Kick and I were to stand stationary in a close stance matchup and we both extend our lead hands, both of our knuckles would touch each other. So that's what Borders is. So at Borders, right when he steps in, Van's main defense, when any attack is shown at him from this position, is just to get his weight on the rear foot and lean back. And sometimes he'll even lean back at the waist. If you notice in the first round of all of his fights, this is his primary defense. And he barely uses the inside slip, and it takes him time before he starts using the inside slip effectively. When he gets into extended exchanges in the middle of the cage, he'll often crowd his combination work. And what he does defensively to escape that or exit is to physically push his opponent away from him. And let's shout out Dan Tom. Crowding work, what that means, if you get into an exchange and you try to extend that exchange, but you get too close, that's what crowding your work means. When he's not the one leading with his jab, he'll often just bounce back and use distance as a defense.
There's one more thing I want to mention, but in terms of leaning back at the waist, I think he likes to do that mostly so he can kind of stay within his range, and you can obviously get clattered for that, just, the leaning back at the waist. But I think, he likes to stay within his range enough where he can come back in after a missed shot. And that's worked for him a lot. But on the same token, to complement his pressuring game, utilizing that slip a little more would be great. And the only other thing in terms of like striking defense that maybe is something to consider, and Johnson throughout the whole fight actually did a great job of this, was just a general, he kind of just doesn't care about kicks at all. He kind of just no-sells them. Every now and then he'll catch a kick and he'll do something real nice with it. But most of the time, he's just kind of staying in the same spot, no-selling them, and he seems to take them quite well. And that it might not even be too much of a consideration this fight. Who knows? That's his main thing. Is he doesn't really have a defensive answer for kicks besides sometimes catching them and sometimes just crowding the kick rather than crowding his own work. He'll just step inside of the kick and start to work his game there, and that tends to work a charm for him.
And like you said, Charles Johnson did a great job exploiting that. When Van did lean back, Johnson would throw like a kick at his arms or even a kick to the body. Sometimes he'd like do a step up low kick, which didn't really do much, but again, no answer for it because he's leaning back.
And he just pepper him with kicks at range, especially like the first half of that first round. He was just peppering him with kicks. It was just like kind of this constant little assault. Every now and then, like you said, he could land this really good body kick, but generally he kind of just no-sells them.
The thing that we kind of missed was the way he deals with low kicks. The only way he does deal with low kicks is kind of counterintuitive of his style, which is to retract his lead leg.
Yeah, the retracting the lead leg, like it obviously doesn't neatly fit into his pressure game because he's not operating from range that much, and like he doesn't really have a funnel from range to funnel him into his desired game besides just his general pressure. But yeah, it's really the only thing he does. He'll take himself out of his stance, he'll retract his lead leg, and then he'll kind of have to put the pressure back on, or it just kind of gives the opponent a moment to reset or come back to center cage. Especially, when he's pressuring them, it gives him that moment to breathe, which he doesn't like because he operates best when his opponent can't do anything and he's just overwhelming them.
Do you think checks would really help him in general? Not in the specific matchup, just in general, because when you check a kick, you're in range, and then he can just, like, right after he checks, he can go straight to the body.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. You can do that. You're keeping yourself within your stance. I mean, you could even do instead of retracting your lead leg, even the Aldo leg kick defense would be a little better because then you can step down into punches. That might even be fine too. In just any form of defense, I think would complement him, especially as you're now leading into like 5-round fights. Flyweight gets weird when you get into that top echelon with like who you're fighting and when, and maybe you'll get Pantoja just because if you have one good performance now, Pantoja's clearing everybody out. But when you do get into those 5-round fights, that's when that actrative work against him might actually start to show something a little more if someone can provide some sort of constant kicking attack.
Czech specifically plays really well into his footwork in general, because if you notice the way he goes at opponents is he'll bring his rear foot up to his lead foot. You kind of need a light lead leg to do that, and I think that would work perfectly with his footwork in general.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point that I didn't catch.
Brandon Royval. So I think this is more meat and potato. Striking wise, Royval, southpaw with an active lead hand. It allows him to push his opponent back. His lead hand is more of a pawing jab, and it's there to mess with the opponent's lead hand and keep his opponent's lead hand at bay. He's often looking to set up his rear body kick and rear teep. Now, although his body kick is his weapon of choice, the teep off the jab for him seems like his best changeup weapon. Unfortunately, he doesn't use it as much as we'd like. Yeah. When he does enter with jabs, he gets his weight to his rear foot and he stands tall, which leaves him open for right hand. Even with Topuria Taira, he was able to counter him cleanly on his entries. He's often looking to counter with a lead hook when his opponents step in. You can see this in the Taira fight. Like whenever Taira do a false entry, you can see Royval loading up his lead hook. He doesn't commit to it right away. One of the favorite things that he does off of the 1-2 is to end his combination with the rear knee. And something I noticed that he does a lot, takes up a lot of space. His opponents will back up to the opposite end of the cage to do this, is after he throws a 1-2 and he blitzes forward, he'll show his lead knee. The moment he shows his lead knee, like the opponent will jump back like a couple of feet. Now, at borders, when his opponents try to throw their rear hand, he actually has a really nice pull counter, and he'll close the door with a lead hook after that. I think that was in the Taira fight, round 3, where Taira kept leading with rear hand. He has a really good pull counter. I don't know how that'll apply in this fight, but that's something to consider if Van does overextend himself, which he sometimes does.
Sometimes does, yeah.
Yeah. He does a good job punching off of kicks.
I think he does. I think that's one of the better parts of what he does is he'll just throw a little punch right off a kick. And Johnson did that to Van quite a bit as well.
What I really like, if it hits the guard, opponent's stunned and stays there for a bit, and then he'll throw the same side hand where he threw the kick from. So like if he throws a right kick, he'll throw the right hand off of that kick. A thing that he does really well is he'll spin off missed kicks. Like he caught Kai Kara France doing that. He did it a bunch of times against Taira, even though he gave up his back doing so. That means that parrying kicks, which Van really likes to do with one hand, is really dangerous against him.
It's interesting because he has this kind of lazy pawing lead hand. And I posted a picture of it yesterday on Twitter. When he throws his right hand, he's really tall, and his feet, he doesn't like have much hip rotation. It's kind of weird. Like his feet are pointing in the opposite direction that his hips want to go. Like they're pointing out to he's a southpaw. So he's pointing out to his left when he's throwing his left hand, and he's not really having any of that, back foot turnover. And it looks like his bottom and top halves are being controlled by I said he looks like a mech that's being controlled by two different people. It's really weird to watch, and he'll leave himself tall, and he just looks really awkward throwing his right hand. His mechanics in those moments and his feet are very weird. It's very weird to watch him strike. It's kind of like this janky punching game, at least in terms of his mechanics, that there's definitely opening when we're looking at matchup against Van, since that's kind of what he does the most, is he's just occupying the lead hand with his own and looking to kind of throw his 1-2 a lot, even if it's not landing, and kind of come into more dogfight-ish combinations after that. But that's the main thing I noticed was his mechanics are very strange. He has a couple nice things that he does on the feet, like the knee, and he'll spin off the missed kicks. He's very opportunistic, but sometimes it doesn't seem like he has like an offensive funnel to get him to a place where he's really good. He's generally just doing as much as he can to the opponent with the reads he's finding in the moment, rather than leading them down a path that brings him to his highest chance of victory.
It's more like he's playing out of range.
Yeah, he's playing out of range, and then he'll react to whatever the opponent does to come in and counter him. So he's always kind of in a reactive state. He's generally the one leading because he's very active, and his nickname, it's a good nickname for him. He's definitely like, I don't like the term, but he's trying to always make it like some sort of dogfight when he enters range, and he'll come in, and that's where he'll land a lot of opportunistic shots. But his game is very opportunistic. It's not very structured.
Those knees, like, kind of high risk, because if the opponent isn't slipping inside, he's on one leg.
Yeah, exactly. Again, and you saw that taking advantage of all the time against, Pantoja, Cerullo, all these opponents that have a good grappling base that can take advantage of that most strongly.
Rewind back to like Van. Do you think that Royval could benefit with a good clinch game?
It's a good question, because he's got a good frame, obviously, and he's got really strong knees, and he also will kind of just throw his uppercut once he kind of enters a combination with his 1-2. Sometimes he'll throw it like preemptively, but not really in response to anything or because of a necessary read. You saw that in the Tyra fight a lot. He'll just throw his uppercut into open space, and sometimes it'll hit as he's advancing. He could enter a clinch off of the things that he does in his general forward movement, and he's got the good knee. I have trouble picturing how that would look against Van, who so far has looked really good in the clinch, and even strong in the clinch against a taller dude like Johnson, where he did do a lot of good work in the clinch.
Speaking about the clinch, let's talk about Brandon Royval's transitional offense. So let's start on the ground, which I don't think Van's gonna try to take this fight to the ground, but
I certainly don't think so.
But on the ground, he attacks high-low. So like Pantoja, he uses the knee reap to get his opponent turning and exposing his back.
Yep.
But unlike Pantoja, he does not take the back with crab rides.
Enter the position and then like go back on the leg. It's very interesting.
Or if the opponent starts to push into him, he'll start attacking up top.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and then when he's on bottom half guard, he's easily giving up the crossface, which isn't great.
I mean, yeah, Pantoja smashed him from half guard like 70% of that fight.
Right, and he gave up the crossface 70% of that fight.
Yeah, exactly. His general approach on bottom isn't great, and he like does things that could help him, but then how he chooses to exploit what the opponent does after, let's say, like entering on the legs and they give up their back, but then he doesn't actually take advantage of an opening that he creates to either get up or get an advantageous position.
It's almost like he's giving more work for himself.
Exactly. Yeah, his whole game strategically is interesting. He's very fun to watch, and he's a cool fighter, but mechanically and strategically, that's where like his, I think, largest openings tend to be.
Even punching off of his kicks, he has some very weird reactions. And let me know if you caught this, but when he gets a kick caught and the opponent starts to push his knee in, he'll actually jump a guillotine like in the Kai Kara France fight and in the Topuria Tyra fight.
Yeah, it's interesting because like that's a good idea, just generally, punching off the kick, and then your follow-up is something that doesn't exactly make as much sense. It's very strange. Like his decision making tends to fail him a lot of times, despite him, even with sometimes shoddy punching mechanics or what have you, he does things that could put him in a better position, but he doesn't follow up on it in the best way.
What's really weird is that usually when you get your kick caught, you're actually in a good position to throw elbows. And since he's a long, lanky guy in the division, he can skewer people with elbows. And instead of that, he just jumps a guillotine.
What? Come on, man. Speaking of elbows, and sorry if this is tangent, but there was like one moment in the Cerullo fight where, and Ryan Wagner talks about this all the time, where he countered with like just folding elbows as he came in, and it was awesome. But that was the only time that he did it. And that's like something when against Van, when you're a tall guy and he's coming forward all the time. And that's actually the interesting consideration of this fight is it'll be interesting to see who actually takes that initiative and has it for most of the fight, that front foot initiative, which in this fight will actually, like a lot of fights, determine probably who's going to be winning. Against Van, like that's like a great thing you could do, but I just don't know if that's something he actually will do reliably other than inside of moments.
That's something I was going to bring up earlier. Again, collar ties, right?
Mm-hmm.
I rarely see Brandon Royval use collar ties. Like he could use collar ties to intercept Van coming in and then follow up with elbows.
No, he totally could. You have the elbows there. You have the knee to while you're pushing their head down. Like you have the frame to exploit someone like Van. Yeah, he just doesn't do that as much, despite being, what is he, 5'9" for flyweight? He's a big boy for flyweight. I thought Johnson was taller. He was only listed as 5'7", but I don't know how correct that is.
Collar ties specifically, he can punish anybody with his opportunistic weapon, which is his knees.
Mm-hmm. Especially when Van does inside slip to get in sometimes. Like that's like when he lowers his level, or for when he does lower his level, that's a perfect time where he could slap that on and use those weapons that you do love.
Speaking of inside slips, I think this is a perfect time to talk about hypothetical game plans for both. So let's start with Royval. Really simple, small tactical adjustments for Royval. If I was coaching him or scouting for him, I would suggest keep using your pawing lead hand to keep Van from using his own jab. And he needs to use his rear body kick and rear teep a lot more in this fight. Pawing lead hand, it's going to be good because it's going to stop Van from getting into a proper stance where he can slip to the elbow side, which would be Royval's right side. Van's normal inside slip to his lead foot, it's going to be harder for him if the kicks keep coming because he can't keep transitioning his weight to the lead foot because if the kicks land, he's going to get caught off balance. Again, kick more and change up with the rear teep and the rear body kick. Van had a lot of trouble against Charles Johnson when Johnson just poked at him with, again, long range kicks. But that was mainly like in the first round with lead leg kicks and lead leg teeps. Granted, again, he used both legs there, but it was mainly his lead leg. So in this case, just keep using your rear leg. And the way to capitalize Van jumping back or leaning back, again, is just throw more kicks. Like whenever you see that as a trigger, just throw a kick like to his arms.
That is something he did do pretty well in the Tyra fight, was he ended some of those combinations with a good like head kick or body kick.
When Van starts to parry those kicks, like we said earlier, Royval does a good job punching off of those kicks. So when you see Van start parrying them, start punching off of them or even spin off of them because Van's not going to try to take the back body lock and submit him from there. Whenever the kicks do land, Van often gets stuck in the mud.
Yeah, he'll stop up for a second and he'll kind of like reset and he'll kind of just like stay in his stance for a second and eat the kicks, and then he'll mosey on over and continue doing what he was doing. So if you can stop that for momentum with that, just keep doing it, because then you can enforce your game off of that and actually create a funnel. He needs to create that funnel to his successful positions. When you're thinking of a funnel, and when I'm saying that, you can also think of it as like concentric circles. There's a lot of ways to think about it. You start a fight standing, you have to deal with that outside game first, and you have to basically stall an opponent from doing things in that position. Now, there's different ways to do that. And with Van, the best way to at least start that process is to just occupy him with kicks. And then the thing that happens when you start to either pressure an opponent or you prevent them from playing their game is they get more and more desperate, because you just feel like you have to land something, and you'll get better reactions and more desperate reactions, better reactions for you. And that's what Royval's really good at, is maybe Van comes in real low, or he'll just throw something offhand that you can hit him with the knee, or you can throw that kick and he'll try and parry it, and then you can spin. He'll be more frustrated. He'll be more focused on his own game and enforcing it than what you are doing, which he's generally pretty good at, being very patient and responding to what the opponent does. But if you can just stop him completely, then you create more opportunities for yourself to bring you into the things that you do best. And in Royval's case, that would be, I mean, like the knee being the big one as something that could end the fight, and or punching off kicks even could possibly end a fight if you catch someone in the right position.
What's going to happen when Royval gets tired of kicking? Because the game plan we're essentially laying out is use kicks to freeze Van and then build off of those kicks with punches or knees. But the problem with that game plan is that Royval has to keep moving to do that.
Yeah.
So this ties into my point. And this, do you think that if he did have a collar tie game, this matchup would be even easier for Royval because he can take breaks in the clinch?
Yeah, I mean, that's the main thing when looking at the clinch is I see that knee in the clinch being something he could really utilize. Then you could pepper his body with it, and then you gain another active weapon, and you gain another area of the fight in which Van wants to avoid as you slowly lead him into the positions that could serve you best.
If he did have a clinch, he could make Van's life really miserable here.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely could have the potential to.
But more realistically, he's probably going to play the outside kicking game for 3 rounds, which is going to get exhausting.
100%. And then, you know, if you're on one leg all the time like that, Van's got that good opportunistic low kick. You know, there are those moments. And then when he's on top turtle, that he does a lot of damage from that position, from like the front headlock. He'll just punch your lights out as much as he can. He's always looking to do damage if he could get you down like that. That's the only time I could see this fight getting into that, getting down, is if Van like catches a good kick while Royval's constantly kicking. The other thing actually that I noticed, and I think someone else pointed this out too, but you saw it in the Johnson fight, you saw it in Van's last fight. The thing that he does really well, especially in his last two, is he'll just kind of pressure with his teeps and his jab, and then the opponent will try and come in with some committed shot that he's easily able to slip, and he can counter that first shot and then follow up with a combination.
What he does really well, and we were talking about this from his outside game, is he'll just tend to pressure you with his teeps and the jab from the outside. And you'll start to get annoyed from that. You're constantly on the back foot. You especially saw this in his last fight and even in the Topuria fight, where he'll just pressure them really simply with his jab and his teep, and he'll get them to the cage. And what they'll tend to do is they'll throw one big shot, tends to be somewhat overcommitted, but even if it's not, he's really good at slipping from that, avoiding it, and countering with a strike of his own, and then entering into a pocket exchange where his defense is really sound. That's probably the place where his defense is best, is actually within that exchange and landing strikes of his own. So when you're within that pocket exchange, one, that's somewhere Royval could possibly prevent that with the collar tie, which, you know, I don't know if he'll actually use, is you can just deny his pocket exchange by getting that collar tie and trying to start something from there. But something that he doesn't do as well is when you're in open space, and I saw someone else have this read as well, he'll get caught a lot of times with split step rear straight. And Johnson caught him with this. He was caught with this in his last fight. When the opponent kind of takes that initiative with just kind of like that naked split step rear straight, he won't really move his head, and he'll get caught with it a lot. And if there's one small tactical thing you could do, at least to kind of find an opening to enter with things, and at the very least just land some form of consistent offense, that's something in terms of the boxing exchanges that he does get caught with.
I really like that you mentioned the split step, because that is really good with the rear kicks of Royval. Rear kick or split step, punch off of the split step. And like you said, Van doesn't have an answer for that.
He hasn't shown one as of yet.
Speaking of Van, I think he has way more adjustments to make in this matchup. Like, even if he did have a full camp, and he's taking this on 3 weeks' notice, so the stuff that he came in against Bruno Silva is probably going to be the stuff that he comes in this fight.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's talk about Van's game plan if he did have a full camp.
Yeah.
So if he did have a full camp, he's going to need to get his jab going early. And that's going to be hard to do against Royval because he has such a bladed stance, so the target's not there. Getting your jabs going against the bladed stance, again, going to be hard at range. He's going to need to win the hand fight battle, and in order to do that, he needs to vary his lead hand play. So an example of trying to steer from the inside, like trying to use your lead hand as guiding a steering wheel, like get it out of the way, and then use that windshield wiper motion or steering wheel motion to land your rear hand. Or another thing he can do is tapping the outside of Royval's lead hand, and after that, trying to find inside position when Royval starts to bounce forward. And again, we say this a lot, or at least Jack Slack says this a lot every week, but double jab him or use a false entry when he bounces back. Whenever Royval bounces back, he's never in a position to counter. And his main answer to false entries, like you'll see in the Topuria fight, is he'll take two big steps back when on the rear foot. For Van, again, I don't think he's going to do this. Use ankle deep step up calf kicks to the lead leg. Anytime Royval starts bouncing in, like try to time that bounce in. And then when you have Royval off balance, start punching to the body. Try to counter Royval's kicks with the straight right to the solar plexus. So good example of this is Stamp versus Sohee Ham, where Stamp throws an intercepting right hand counter to the body off of Sohee Ham's rear leg kick. And we talked about this in the first podcast, but do you think it's concerning that Van has to make all of these adjustments just to be competitive against Royval?
I think there are also other opportunities that Royval might present that might make this more competitive. One, due to his decision making, and two, because of his mechanics, and three, actually thinking about Usyk. But I can jump into those if you want.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So the one thing I noticed in this, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was just in the later rounds of the Topuria fight, but let me know right now if you think this is true as well. Does Royval's like actual punching, or maybe it's just because of the way that he chooses to punch and kind of have his lead hand extended out a lot, it looks kind of slow. He's not like, his actual like punching speed isn't very fast. And
that is a good point, because
yeah,
it seems like from when he's blitzing in, it does seem like it's fast. He's like sitting down in the pocket, hand extended. He almost has to regather himself, right?
Yeah, and because when he throws that rear hand, like I said, his lower body is kind of moving in or it's just kind of planted in the opposite direction. It almost is planted, and his feet are pointing in the opposite direction that he wants to go. And just the actual punching itself does look kind of slow. And what I see there, and this is something you saw Usyk do to Fury, which is also a pretty significant height discrepancy there, is his lead hand is extended out all the time, and he's kind of a slow puncher. That's when you can slip inside and try and get that outside foot position and just try and pepper with some right straights to the body. And I think that works really well with the double jab as well, get him moving back and just throwing a hard right straight to the body. Also, because his footwork isn't super sound, he does tend to collapse his stance, like he gets his feet really close together a lot. And if you get a good, right straight to the body, you can knock him down just from that, just because he's in a compromised position. So I think that's one area in which I could really see Van, if he chooses to, a lot on the body work. I know he tends to, if he does outside slip, in that open stance, you could find the right straight there without too much of the threat of the knee. You can also try the body jab. You're leaving yourself open for that knee a little more, forming that consistent body attack and playing those two strikes off of each other. That's going to be a bit better for you to land each of those consistently, because he'll be worried about occupying those and he won't know which one's coming. That's where I can see a real opportunity for Van if he can enter exchanges like that. And also, because of the way that he throws his right straight, even though he is tall, if Van can try and just catch him with his own right straight as he's throwing his, because you saw Tyra clatter him a couple times when he was throwing his right straight, and he just does not take it well. He's out of his stance. Because of the way that his body is and the way that his body's moving, he's just not in a good position to take punches.
And that's where you could do some real damage. And Van, he's a respectable hitter. He tends to overwhelm with volume, but I think you could really hurt him there.
That's a really good point, because especially when he's bouncing in, right?
Yeah,
Van
exactly.
can really like catch him with like the overhand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, catch him with the overhand as he's throwing his weird ass rear hand.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing with that is just timing his bounce, because he's a north-south fighter. So what that means for the people that are listening is he likes to bounce forward and back. He's not like an east-west guy that is constantly changing angles or constantly circling out. Royval's more of a go forward and backwards. So like contrast that with somebody like Jonathan Martinez, who likes to move side to side and time people stepping in. Royval's more of a guy that goes forward and backwards and tries to blitz in when the opponent's not expecting it.
Yeah, everything's very committed.
Yeah, and that's something that Kick's saying is he can really get punished doing that if Van is looking just to time the step. Like, it doesn't have to be a specific strike from Royval. It just has to time his step coming in.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Yeah, just more generally using it in that way would definitely help.
I think we've exhausted this matchup, so I think we'll close it down there. Is there anything else you want to plug?
On my site, you'll see something that either says fight shorts or Muay Thai shorts. I think pre-orders of that will be going out soon. So if you at least want to put your email in there and get notified when they come out, definitely feel free to.
Yeah, go buy those shorts. They look dope.
Thanks, bro.
All right, good stuff, and we'll see you on the next one. We'll be covering the co-main event and the main event for UFC 317. So, as you know, we like to go really in deep in these, so those will be separate episodes. And with that, see you guys.
See ya.